Hello, this is Richard Pearce from FinextraTV, and I'm joined today by Elena Philipova. Hi, Elena.
Hey, Richard.
Good to see you again. Now, listen, you're, as everyone knows, the global head of ESG propositions at Refinitiv, and a great supporter of everything that's going on in sustainable finance and what we're doing at Finextra. I wanted to have a chat with you today a little bit about what's happening at our next workshop. But before we do that, give us a sort of sense of the role that you do, the diversity of things that you do, and we'll get into a bit more detail after that.
Sounds good, and thanks for having me. So, as mentioned, I head up the ESG business at Refinitiv, previously the financial and risk business of Thomson Reuters. And I was also a member of the technical expert group on sustainable finance appointed by the European Commission. Refinitiv, I think it's worth just mentioning what we do at Refinitiv and specifically around sustainable finance, because I do believe we play a very important role. Refinitiv is, interestingly enough, the youngest fintech with the longest heritage, going back to the 1851 from Reuters. And really, at the heart of what we do is we power the global financial industry with data, workflows, and expertise. In terms of ESG or sustainability, we've enabled sustainable investment strategies since the early 2000s. And we offer one of the most comprehensive ESG data sets in the industry. So we do have a quite deep expertise in this field, which is relatively immature in its early days, but it's something we've been very passionate about for quite some time.
And there's so much, as you said, it is early days and there's a lot of great data, but of course there's so much rhetoric around. There's also a lot of new and emerging standards, lots of people contributing great work. If you sort of picked out of what's been going on recently and the work you've been doing, what would you say, to focus on? People talk about, for instance, TCFD and SASB as kind of being priorities, but what's your take on what's important in the market at the moment?
There is, as you say, a lot going on. And I guess I would try to highlight maybe three areas. The first is that at the beginning of the year, as 2020 has been a very interesting year, to say the least, but at the beginning of the year, there was a very much skepticism in the market around sustainability and ESG. Which I think very quickly faded away, and we saw that actually what's happening this year is a lot more momentum and acceleration behind this agenda, which is desperately needed, because the call for action and the need to step up the game has been communicated with the market very loudly in the last couple of years, but somehow progress has always been not fast enough, not enough. And I think that this year is really a tipping point for this agenda. And we hope to see a lot more both initiatives and embracement across mainstream capital markets and capital allocation decisions trickling down as a result of some of these very critical industry initiatives looking to solve for the fundamental challenges. And from our perspective, the fundamental challenges that the industry face is around standards, definitions, and transparency. And they are intimately interrelated. And without those very basic fundamental prerequisites, it's really difficult and unfair to hold the market, the financial markets, accountable for the way that capital is being allocated. In terms of standards and definitions, so the first challenge, I think the most important development from my perspective sitting in Europe is the Action Plan on Sustainable Finance and the work led by the European Commission, which I believe has certainly a much global reach, a much broader reach than the boundaries of the EU. With, of course, the work on the EU taxonomy, but also the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation and the full suite of action items included in that agenda, which I think set the blueprint for sustainable finance globally.
Yeah,
And in terms of just standards, which is the second part of the equation and my third highlight of the year, there's been also quite a lot of discussions and initiatives being set up by both the private sector, but also the public sector, to harmonize, to bring common understanding on what are those material metrics that companies should track, manage, and report on, so that investors and other stakeholders can better integrate sustainability consideration when making investment decisions or when making purchasing decisions. And to name probably a few there, of course, we know the IFRS consultation paper to the market on asking very valid questions. What role should IFRS play? And in our opinion, they have a very important critical role to play. But also the intent published by the major sustainability standard setters to harmonize, to explain to the market why there are currently differences and bring more harmonization.
So in that context, if you think about our next workshop, what we're doing is we're thinking about the use of alternative data, so satellites and sensors, and we're looking at spatial finance, obviously looking at the geospatial location of assets and so forth. How do you, it's an area that you guys are very involved in with the Sustainable Data Alliance. How do you sort of reconcile one group that's saying we need to standardize, minimize so that we can baseline, and then also, but we need more data? How do you kind of both reconcile that, and what use will this data be to inform the decisions that you were just describing?
Yeah, and I think that both are critically important. The need to have fundamental data points around sustainability performance is very important foundation on which then differentiation, innovation should be created by the industry itself by leveraging a very important insights from alternative data sets like geospatial data. And we at Refinitiv are very much committed to both, and we play a very critical role across acceleration on both agendas in parallel. Earlier this year, we formed, together with strategic partners, the Alliance on Sustainable Data, the Future of Sustainable Data Alliance. And we think that this is really a first of a kind alliance that aims to drive acceleration of sustainable finance through the power of data. I guess that's how I would summarize it and explain. The primary objective of the alliance is to accelerate the mobilization of capital into sustainable finance. And so for the question of what data do investors, governments, and other stakeholders need to meet the requirements of what economy and what products are required to pursue the 2030 agenda as defined by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And clearly there is data that exists today. There are no challenges with this data and gaps. But actually, if we think about the data of the future, in that future quite transformed world, the needs there are quite different, and there are lots of what we call data holes. So there are a number of those topics covered in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are not really even tackled by current standards, and there is very little data. Like, for example, in biodiversity and ecosystems, to assess the impact that companies have on the ecosystem and investors indirectly through their capital allocation decision is, in our opinion, a data hole. And likewise, if we look at asset level data, which is where geospatial comes in, it's an extremely valuable input and source of information. We would also consider this to be a data hole, because although there has been a lot of geospatial data generated and used for many, many years in the past, it has not been leveraged to solve for the investor use case. And I think that that's where the biggest opportunities in the future lie, and that's what makes it very exciting for us to be involved in that work.
Yeah, and thanks for clarifying that. That's really makes it clear. I think the other thing that I was listening to the Green Horizon Summit. I don't know if you picked up on any of the announcements from that last week, where Christine Lagarde, Mark Carney, etc., were saying, we really need to move to forward-looking, real-time analytics, as opposed to just, as you were saying there, the sort of historical rear view perspective. Do you think this sort of data will contribute to that call to action from those people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like to make the analogy with financial data because for me, non-financial or sustainable data is not fundamentally different. We at Refinitiv have always treated ESG as fundamental data set, but one which is a couple of decades behind financial data, so to speak. And there you also have core financial, core fundamental data used as the basis of majority of the financial workflows, processes, and decisions. But then the true differentiation and alpha generation over time is created by leveraging alternative data sets, which are not usable and commonly accessible by the market. And that's where I see this type of information coming in very extremely handy to enable the market, and not only to solve for some of the existing data gaps that we have because we lack standardized fundamental ESG data, but actually enable that so much needed innovation and differentiation, as well as bring in more trust and confidence when making investment decisions, because that industry should be built on the concept of trust. And when there are data gaps and issues, we realize, and the current state of our industry is one with a number of trust concerns that I think can be improved by the ability to validate data through, for example, geospatial insights.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in the workshop, we're bringing together people like WWF and Refinitiv, so you've got the NGO, the biodiversity, the data perspective, as well as, EBRD and, others, to try and workshop through some of these things. Because I think a lot of, I'd be interested, do you think a lot of people in the industry still are struggling to understand how to apply all of these new directives and initiatives that are coming their way? And if you do agree, how do you find these workshops that you've been such a great supporter of, how do you find them useful in helping people, come together and figure out solutions to difficult problems?
Yeah, and I'll start with a cliche. We're all on a journey. I know we've been hearing and saying this for a very long time, and we might as well get prepared as we'll be hearing and saying this for a very long time as well. It's a transformative journey.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of uncertainty in the market, and the simpler and practical we can make it for the industry, the better and faster we can mobilize it and move it in the direction that the industry needs to move. And that's the key reason that really makes the workshop so important. It's the fact that they're extremely practical and looking to solve for real life challenges that different customer segments or different parts of the market are facing, and present them with real life immediate solutions, tools, explanations to solve for very complex issues. Actually explain they're not that complicated and there are actual current solutions that can be leveraged to overcome the challenges. I think that's very important for the industry right now. And the second thing that excites me about the workshop and makes it so important is the diversity of expertise that is brought around the table, the passion and the commitment that comes from different angles into the same problem, and that critical thinking and diversity really enables us to come up with solutions that hit the problem at the heart. And that's very important, and it's fascinating.
It's certainly interesting, isn't it? And it's a great journey, as you say. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on and explaining what you're up to, and for your dedication to this subject over quite a few years, and obviously with the workshop. So we're looking forward to working with you on that, and hearing from you as we go through the next round of FinextraTV. So for now, Elena from Refinitiv, thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Richard.